Bernard de Montreal. Book Beyond the Mind. Chapter 6. The Mind and the Unrecognized Cosmic Self. Egocentric consciousness is a finite expression of the whole mind. We conduct our lives as if our mind was the sole expression of our subjective and personal self. The mind veils the covert operation of psychic entities evolving on higher or lower planes in a multidimensional reality of which the soul is an integral, unconscious part. Those intelligences cannot partake in the human experience except through the communicative ability they share with man through his psychic apparatus. But they can influence his life to an extent that would shock the staunchest supporter of the free will theory who is ignorant of the occult side of human nature. The psyche is a more or less integrated multidimensional reality extending beyond physical boundaries. A greater understanding of psychic forces at work raises the level of awareness of it in absolute terms. While the mind expresses itself through the electric connection with the physical brain, the psyche is the astral and etheric expression of its essence. The universe is filled with mind energy which serves the inherent purpose of creation. Man is the creative end of mind expansion. Through the harmonization of his consciousness or subtle principles, he will benefit from total mind experience according to the level of his evolutionary development. Because consciousness is experienced within the confines of a physical dimension seemingly disconnected from the total mind experience, the task of arriving at the center of human reality is achieved through a long and arduous evolution. We measure and identify with the pulse of our mind according to the success or lack of it that we achieve in life. This system has shortcomings since it only reveals the inherent phases of a programmed strategy of the mind energy penetrating the psychic dimension of consciousness. Education is unable at this stage to teach us the benefits of the conscious mind. For educators, the mind and the psyche are one and the same. In actuality, the mind is the psyche's pre-personal self, its cosmic counterpart, unidentified within the field of human unconsciousness. The mind is a mental universe equal in psychic terms to the reality of the physical universe. As with all universes, it is inhabited by beings or intelligences. As a world interacting with the many dimensions of man, it is as real as it can be understood. The mind is at man's disposition if he does not subject himself to lower astral influences that color it. Fusion or unity with the mind leads to a full understanding of the mysteries and traps of human consciousness. We have little knowledge of the mind because our objective relationship with it is wanting. We find it mind-boggling to experience it as a pre-personal creative and intelligent presence that evolves alongside our physical, astral and lower, intellectualized reality. The mind cannot be fully investigated unless conscious dialogue with it is established. That is, until men communicate with it objectively. Nor can it be revealed fully until the link is severed with the lower thinking habits characteristic of the evolutionary development of human racial unconsciousness. It is not of the mind to instruct in the laws of truth, but rather to show the way out of experiential soul illusions which have served throughout history to keep humanity ignorant of the infinite nature of reality. How can truth be of interest to the mind when by its very consequences it has demonstrated historically the depth of naive, spiritualized consciousness? The mind seeks to undermine all forms of human truth because they do not, cannot, and never did coincide with the universal patterns of creative energy generated from the infinite nature of its will. Only through manifest will does creation occur. Until the nature of such will is understood, it remains an impossible task to understand the mind. Without will, consciousness remains bound to the past, that is, to memory, which is but a part of the mind energy active at the astral level of human consciousness. The cosmic dimension of the mind and the cosmic dimension of the self are one and the same. There is difference only in the concept. When one thinks of self, it is of oneself, whereas when the mind is thought of, there is conscious participation with the higher self. The higher self is the universal reservoir of human thought emanating from a pre-personal level, and gradually descending the scale of thought vibration until the ego identifies with it as a personalized form of thought energy. The egoic mind has difficulty differentiating the many vibrational levels that create the illusion of self-generating thoughts. As a result, contact is lost with consciousness that would otherwise allow an increase in centricity and a new alignment between the higher mental and lower memorial activity. The mind is not a terminal of thought energy but its source. Self-consciousness becomes its terminal function as its reality and power diminish when it moves reality to the human psyche under the guise of endless self-centered thoughts and contradictory ideas. It is a matter of consciousness to be able to discern between mechanical thoughts and creative ones. The difference becomes self-evident as the seat of a centered consciousness develops. Creative thoughts become highly resonant and vibrant as they penetrate, through sheer power, the egoic fabric and imprint themselves forcefully in consciousness. Mechanical thoughts have little bearing on the vital function of the conscious ego, which has the ability to disengage itself from a linear path of experience in order to generate new self-revealing or creative movement. that increases its inner freedom towards greater mobility and development. The cosmic self can be identified through the disengaging process of thought egoification. Through this creative process, the ego begins to understand the inner workings of the mind and its relevancy to the whole process of thought generation. Thoughts are used by the cosmic self to incorporate its creative laws into the human dimension of experience in order to elevate it and make it perfect throughout evolution. The blind spot in human consciousness is to associate thought with one's self. In doing so, the ego colors, through its lower principles, an energy which otherwise would reveal perfectly the occult nature of consciousness. The mind does not belong to man per se. It is created instantaneously through the movement of thought generated on levels of reality that transcend the physical plane. The mind is the unrecognized cosmic self, and functions on a lower vibratory scale than would be necessary were man conscious of the difference between thought generation and thought reflection. The generational nature of thought serves the purpose of informing through a higher mental channel, whereas reflective thought is but a circular process that engages the ego in subjective mental activity through the electrification of the physical brain. The brain only represents the physical dimension or electromagnetic nature of thought. In reality, thought moves in ethers that are free and very distant from the manifestation of the actual thought phenomenon. Thought is energy. Its meaning is but the colored reflection of this energy in the memory system that has developed throughout physical incarnation. It is important to understand that the nature of thinking has little to do with the ultimate nature of consciousness. The mind in its cosmic function serves to link the energy of thought in its primordial state to a developing experiential ego in order to increase that subject's consciousness through the evolutionary process. The universe of the mind is a multidimensional experience lived simultaneously by the incarnated soul and its spirit or double which evolves beyond the astral or death plane. If the mechanics of consciousness are to be understood, the ego will be forced by the evolutionary confrontation of the self and its thought-adjusting principle to relate to thought as a simple mechanism that constantly tests its emotional nature in order to free it from the want of identity immanent at the physical level of the being experience. Not only is the mind a quantum of intelligent energy we call thought, it is also a prepersonal evolutionary force that embodies the yet unrealized but inevitable process of cosmic fusion, fusion with intelligences that are free and always have been from the incarnational experience. For this fundamental reason, the student of the occult must learn to differentiate between astral entities that have access to the brain through thought manipulation, and the double or spirit or thought adjuster that represents the cosmic attempt at unity with man. The notion of the cosmic self as an undefinable principle raises philosophical and metaphysical questions of a speculative nature only because man's egoic self-centeredness has not been transmuted by direct contact with non-astral mind energy sources. This will inevitably occur as human consciousness matures into a more sophisticated frame of mind. The future of human mental development will accelerate according to the rate of breakdown of egocentricity. As mind energy displaces antiquated race memory and moves closer to a new advancement of inner human communication. There is a relationship between more sophisticated psychic techniques of communication and the penetrating forces of the mind expanding the frontiers of consciousness further away from the unconsciousness of humanity's past. Theoretical advances in science, aided by new computer technology, will force the human mind to accept dimensional models which, in time, will point increasingly in the direction of evolutionary forces active beyond highly developed physical or metaphysical models. The engagement in the development of new evolutionary models of the universe will force the ego to abandon its narrow views of reality and gradually open itself to dimensions of knowledge which will bring it beyond what is safe for the maintenance of psychological status quos. From that point on, historical naivety will decrease and the search for real mind freedom will grow as man becomes more willing to view a reality that is closer at hand and more revealing than his self-centered attitudes have led him to believe. The egoic structure will then collapse and a new consciousness will define the parameters of the cosmic self which have always been considered undefinable for reasons of spiritual fear and philosophical impotence. The cosmic reality of the self is in the psychic, not the psychological dimension of the mind. Human nature is that of duality, a psychological and egocentric one that focuses on itself, and another, less active and psychic one of objective communication. From this higher mental plane, there is a relationship with a prepersonal dimension of the mind, or to what has been subjectively called the cosmic self. The self as perceived egoically only represents the lower psychological dynamics of human consciousness. It is fed creative thoughts from higher planes but is too embedded in layers of unconscious thought matter to relate objectively to its source and, therefore, cannot sustain for a lengthy period of time creative thought generation. Such awareness or conscious intelligence tunes into a more refined level of being, where information inevitably complements the linear and rational parameters of the intellect responsible for the unconscious karmic soul experience. The unconscious mind masks the cosmic self. It lacks the awareness or intelligence to extrapolate psychic from subjective psychological material. Were man conscious enough to do so, he would find himself face to face with the dual reality of his nature instead of being a prisoner of it. The mind can only be explored through the psychic dimension that stretches infinitely beyond any form of subjective thinking. One of the great mysteries of the human mind lies in its unconscious connection with lower astral and higher mental planes. That is, spheres of intelligent activity that extend beyond the physical dimension and by which the human mind has always been influenced. As humanity evolves psychically, beyond its psychological dimension and rational limits, it will come into contact with other worlds whose evolution will help in determining the future political and scientific development of humanity. The mind is an energy that selects its own potential in its evolution. It cannot be stretched psychologically into its psychic dimension. Its confining memory binds it to the archives of the past. Memory is useless in opening the mind to the cosmic present which encompasses the evolutionary future. The speculative nature of philosophical questions put forth by the human mind is, historically, proof of its limitations. Were the human mind free, it would be capable of directly engaging in objective dialogue with the higher, non-astral, mental plane, and questions about human and cosmic reality would once and for all be settled. Man would cease to perceive reality from a limited, rational or planetary point of view. He would naturally gain access to the inaccessible and as a result, evolve according to cosmic rather than karmic laws. The mind is a communication mystery, essentially a pre-personal intelligence field evolving in a multidimensional universe, more or less in time with the human psyche. Human consciousness vibrates only partially to different reality levels. As it evolves, consciousness tunes in increasingly to the psychic planes which are ultimately the universal dimension beyond the physical continuum. Reality extends infinitely beyond the realm of astral and spiritualized truth, or any belief system the human mind may project for the protection of its egocentric, psychological territory. When the mind projects itself into other dimensions of reality through the use of the astral or etheric bodies, it is easy to observe that the soul is coterminal between the physical and more ethereal dimensions of consciousness. As a result, it prevents the mind from freeing itself from the astral chains which block its understanding of reality beyond the conscious dream state or astral experience. Were man able to relate intelligently to the astral dimension through the use of his etheric body, the astral veil would disappear and his consciousness would ascend towards an integral perception of the parallel worlds that are the fundamental constructs from which human consciousness is derived. The concept of God, for instance, is an astral concept kept alive by the soul memory to prevent man from using his etheric principle in the study or investigation of reality. It is a little-known fact that astral dimensions are parallel worlds which serve the development of souls at the expense of human evolution. On the basis of this cosmic fact, the nature of human consciousness is absolutely subservient to astral forces whether man is aware of them or not. The concept of the subconscious mind comes from this astral fact. Were man conscious, his subconscious mind would not interfere with the psychic makeup of his creative and universal intelligence, and his psychological nature would not be an impediment to the full development of his identity. It is impossible to understand the nature of the mind unless certain occult and universal principles are taken into consideration in the study of self. For instance, thoughts do not originate within the psychological framework of egoic consciousness. The ego is the result of accumulated thought and emotional energy imprinted on the astral or lower mind, and through the aging process, the ego satisfies the astral dimension of its consciousness at the expense of the etheric or higher mental dimensions of its reality. For this reason man finds it difficult to relate psychically to his integral self. Thus the cause of human bondage. The mind originates in the higher universes of thought, and gradually winds down to the level of human consciousness through the expression of the physical brain, which is energetically supported by the etheric forces of the soul. It is important to understand that the soul carries within itself, at different stages of development, all the incipient principles of energy that underlie the past, present, and future potential of its evolution. It does not yet participate universally in its overall energy reality. Were it otherwise, human consciousness would be very advanced and man a superior being. To understand the soul and its limitations, one must understand the psychological boundaries of the mind. The soul evolves through the evolution of the mind, not the other way around. If man had to wait for soul evolution to evolve at the mind level, it would be a very long process, for there is no active creative intelligence principle in the soul except at the etheric level of its psychic organization. The astral nature of the soul infringes on the rapid development towards an integrated self-identity. It impedes natural communication between the ego and its higher mental level. The higher self or double is man's fundamental principle of intelligent thought generation, active between the mental worlds and the etheric planes of soul activity. The soul is a psychic entity. It has a life of its own, independent of the human experience. Through the incarnational process, The unconscious ego, which is composed of the lower mental and emotional imprints and created by soul experience, is a retarding factor in the evolution of the mind as long as it remains ignorant of the source and the mechanisms of thought generation. The soul remains to this day a veiled reality. Much of what has been said about it is clouded, archaic, and conforms to religious interpretations for the benefit of conventional mass conditioning. There is little universal knowledge to be found in world literature that derives from direct communication with the mental worlds. The limited knowledge that deals with the universal and occult nature of the soul is too marginal for mass consumption and is accessible to only a few. The cosmic self and the soul are two different bodies. The cosmic self is the summation of evolutionary experience which is under the guidance of the higher self or double. It oversees soul evolution through the manifestation of generated thoughts as its light, guiding man throughout his planetary experience. While the cosmic self is man's highest intelligence principle, the soul corresponds to his personal reality in the embodiment of this evolutionary experience. It should be understood that the ego, through the use of its physical brain, picks up but a fraction of highly generated thought energy from the mental planes of consciousness. This limited human receptivity at the psychic level is the cause behind such slow development of man's psychic gifts. The underlying nature of consciousness will not be fully understood until man's psychic level of awareness has risen above the subjective memorial dimension of his planetary reality.